Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Katie Baker. I'm the Executive Director of FAIR Idaho. FAIR, just in case you're not familiar with our organization, FAIR stands for Food, Agriculture, Restaurants, and Establishments. We are a nonprofit trade association that represents our local food system. So within our fold, our membership fold, we have farmers, ranchers, food and beverage producers. That could be a salsa maker all the way to a craft brewer. We have independent restaurants, beverage establishments, and retailers. And so we really appreciate everyone joining us today. I think Amy and I have hosted a couple roundtables in the past discussing some of the livestock processing issues that smaller producers face here in the state of Idaho. And that's sort of what brought us here. To be honest with you, they're our most well-attended roundtables. I know this is a pretty big issue for producers to get processing dates. And so because we advocate on behalf of our members, we wanted to try to bring everyone together now that we've sort of had these discussions and see where the next step is for our organization to advocate on behalf of this issue. So I'll let Amy introduce herself, and then I'll be around to answer any questions towards the end. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Katie. So hi, my name is Amy Mateus. My full-time role is the program director for the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience. So I'm located up here in Bellevue, Idaho, in the Wood River Valley, Sun Valley area. And I do a lot of work with farmers and ranchers in the regional food system. I'm also on the board of FAIR Idaho, which is why I'm facilitating this conversation today. I chair the Farm and Ag Committee for FAIR. And as Katie mentioned, we've been looking into the livestock processing issues over the past, 18 months or so. And a few of our farm members and committee members for the Farm and Ag Committee have asked us to look into state inspection programs. So that's what we're here to discuss today. We'll get into the nitty-gritty details about it, and also FAIR being an advocacy organization, we represent the voices of our members. So if our members want us to push forward and advocate for a state inspection program, that's what we're here to do. So we are out seeking insights and feedback from our membership base or potential membership base on if this is something that they want us to pursue. So we're not saying, yes, we're doing it today. We're saying, tell us what you think. And if enough people think that we should, that will be the momentum that we take going into 2023. So Katie, do you want to do general housekeeping stuff quickly?
I already had my microphone muted, which is why you didn't hear me, but please mute yourself when you're not speaking, and then control any background noise to the best of your ability when you are speaking. If you'd like to just raise your hand or enter something into the chat box, please feel free to do that. This is an open forum and we'd love to hear from you all. And if you have any follow-up questions, just shoot a quick email to hello@fairidaho.org and I'll put that in the chat as well.
Awesome, thanks, Katie. And if you want to go to the agenda slide, so I'm going to spend like probably less than 10 minutes talking about the federal meat inspection, state meat inspection, and some of the pros and cons that we've assessed of a state inspection program. And then, we're currently undertaking a survey to assess interest, and that interest can be farmers or ranchers, existing processors or potential new processors, and then buyers who would buy that meat from a state inspected program. And then we'll just have an open discussion where people can share their thoughts, their opinions, their questions, concerns, etc. So the bulk of this webinar will be focused in that open discussion piece. But if you have questions or comments during the kind of introductory part, you're welcome to pop those into the chat or raise your hand, and Katie can call on you to take the floor. So Federal Livestock Processing 101. Next slide, Katie, if you can. Thank you. So I'm not going to give you guys all the background. Some of you probably already know this, but the Federal Meat Inspection Act was passed in 1906, and that is the regulatory act for processing cattle, swine, sheep, goats, and horse. Horse isn't something that a lot of us eat nowadays, but in the turn of the century, that was a more popular meat product. The FSIS, which is part of the USDA, is the authority for meat processing. The requirements include sanitary conditions and humane treatment guidelines. An inspector, an FSIS or USDA inspector, has to be present in the facility through the entire slaughter process. That's known as continuous inspection. We do have existing exemptions within the federal landscape for custom facilities. Those are also often called custom exempt. Those do not require an on-site inspector, but it's limited of who can actually buy those products. So oftentimes from a customer standpoint, you'd be getting a custom exempt product if you're buying a whole or a half cow, or if a farmer is processing for themselves to eat, they might do that in a custom exempt facility. And the retail facilities, that's more like your butcher shop that's getting a previously slaughtered animal and is breaking it down a little bit more. So like when you go to the grocery store and you're getting a cut of meat that might be cut up on site, but it was harvested and killed off site at a USDA inspected facility. And then one of the big things to think about in this conversation is cost. So the cost of inspection is covered by the federal government, except for overtime and holiday wages, and those are taken on by the actual facility itself. Katie, you want to go to the next slide? So state inspection happens when a state enters into an agreement with FSIS, and that state would then operate their own meat inspection program. So this is primarily what we're talking about in this conversation. Idaho currently does not have a state meat inspection program. There are 29 states that have them. We've seen 2 come online with that in the past 2 years, Oregon being one of them, and then Arkansas just publicly announced their agreement today. So, and I think we're going to see New Mexico come on board in the next 12 months or so. So we're actually seeing more states adopt these inspection programs as we talk about how to create a more fair and just food system for all. A lot of these state inspection programs really help to serve small and mid-scale producers who are primarily focused on selling within state lines. So the state inspection program must be at least equal to, that's the legal terminology, meaning that their regulations have to be at least equal to the existing federal regulations. Most of the state programs are intra-state commerce only, so selling to any type of buyer, restaurant, wholesaler, retail customer, at the farmer's market, direct to consumer, but within the state of Idaho. However, there are some agreements that allow for interstate sales. Montana has signed into one, but it caps that only certain scale, so smaller scale facilities can sell over state lines. So that there are some loopholes to over state lines, because we know some of our communities, especially in northern Idaho, might have a lot of customers just over on the other side of the border. So there are potential ways to think about that over the border sale, but you'd have to be already in an agreement with the federal government to operate a state inspection program before you could add on that. Another thing that we need to consider is the cost. It's usually a 50-50 split between state and federal government. All the programs that we looked at, the state funding comes out of the general fund. There might be a few revenue streams like fees that they're charging for people, like licensure fees to get a state facility up and running, but those are primarily funded by general funds in the state. And as some of you may know, Idaho has had a surplus over the last few years, so we think it could potentially be a good time to look at using some of those surplus dollars to create a program like this, and 50% of it is still covered by the federal government. So Katie, next slide, please. Or maybe I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions or additions to make. And then if not, we can go into the pros and cons of a state program. So, okay, Elliot asked, do we have cost data related to what the state is paying for these programs? It varies a lot. We do not have a study currently for what it would cost Idaho to implement this program. We've seen, I think Wyoming's is around $850,000 a year, and that's split 50-50 federal to state. Montana's is 2.2 million per year. Let me look at the other ones I have written down. So yeah, Montana is 1.7 million per year, 50-50 split. Some of these programs do provide that number publicly. Other programs, we're kind of trying to get in contact with a person who is managing the program to get some more details because it's not public. Some of the programs are housed within specific departments that, like Wyoming, for instance, their $865,000 a year budget, it's not 100% going to meet inspection. They also do some other lab testing there for other different food manufacturing that's covered in that 865. So it really varies just depending on the size of the program and then the scope of the program. So that's definitely something that we need to do some more research on before we would move forward. And that would be part of kind of assessing what the legislation looks like that we would have to write to get this adopted. Does this cover existing facilities or only new ones built to specific specs? So a state inspection program would be something that existing facilities could qualify for. If you're already USDA inspected, you would pretty much automatically also qualify for state because it's that at least equal to regulation there. New ones being built would have to follow specific regulations, just like they would if they were qualifying for USDA. You can, which is kind of a strange thing, you can be both USDA and state inspected. You would just Monday and Tuesday, you'd be USDA for those customers that want it. And Wednesday and Thursday, you might be state for those customers that want it. Or if you're a custom exempt facility, custom exempt might have some more updates to make to their facilities to meet those at least equal to regulations and guidelines. Some of the things that you can do to support that would be to put in funding that would help get those custom exempt facilities up to that threshold, whether it's providing them technical assistance to create a HACCP plan or providing grant dollars to help them enhance. Why would you give up federal inspection to? That's a great question, Ellie. I don't think I can tell people why they would give that up. I think we have a couple members of FAIR that are looking at building USDA facilities, and they're told that it's going to be at least 2 to 3 years before a USDA inspector could be present at their facility. So they could potentially start with state and then move up to federal inspection. So you might give up federal inspection. Like, I don't think anyone would actually give up federal inspection, but if you did, it might be because your federal, you can't get your federal inspector to be there as often as you need to meet your demand. So you could have a state inspector there more frequently, perhaps. You could also see that your demand is limited for interstate sales, so you actually don't need to operate on that federal space, so then you could adopt state inspection only. But most likely people that are currently USDA are not going to benefit from state inspection. The way that it could potentially benefit a USDA processor is if more state inspected facilities come online. And then you as a USDA have more slots opened up for the customers that require the USDA facility inspection. And then the customers that don't can go to the state inspected facility instead. These are great questions. Some of them we do capture in our pros and cons. Where do state inspectors come from and who trains? So the entire state inspection program would be managed by ISDA. That's kind of what happens when states adopt these new programs, is their existing Department of Ag manages them. So there would be additional funds available for ISDA, who would train those inspectors and pay those inspectors. There's definitely some considerations to make about workforce. And I think USDA does provide some training opportunities and pays for some training for inspectors at state facilities. That would just have to be part of the agreement that we would sign with the federal government if we did move this forward. Okay, I'm going to just jump into some of these pros and cons that we've talked about. So the pros can be obviously expanding the opportunity for small and mid-scale producers who sell within the state. The inspection is managed by the State Department. So in a an amazing state like us here in Idaho, there are some concerns with federal oversight. So people might be more comfortable seeking state oversight versus federal oversight if they're a new operator or they're custom exempt, but don't want to get involved with the federal regulations. It may also reduce lead time on getting an inspector on site. This isn't something that would happen overnight, but once the state program is up and running, we can imagine that inspectors would be easier to get, especially in rural locations where USDA inspectors are really hard to get there because of travel costs. There might not be places for them to live in that area. The rural facility might not process enough to keep an inspector employed full time. So then they would have to figure out other ways to fill their hours at different facilities and then be driving in between them. So it becomes logistically complicated for those inspectors. It could also be considered a stepping stone from custom exempt to federal inspection. So someone could start at custom, step into state, and then eventually go to federal inspection. They could start at state and then go to federal if they wanted to. And then it definitely provides an option for an expanded market beyond what currently you can do within custom exempt. So a lot of our smaller farmers and ranchers that are selling direct to consumers, they go custom exempt and they can only sell a half a cow or a quarter cow. They can't sell like an individual package of ground beef. They also can't sell to restaurants or small retail stores. So the state program would allow them to have more market channels without actually having to do the full USDA. So the cons of the state program, as we talked about, are definitely funding. The federal government already funds the federal program. So if we were to add on a state program, we would be liable for 50% of that funding. So that's definitely a consideration. I have here that programs cost between $1 and $3 million. We'd have to get more into the weeds on the legislation itself to say how much this could cost Idaho. And that would be something that FAIR would work on with ISDA, with other groups within our state to really assess the feasibility of doing this before we push legislation forward. It does definitely require new or existing facilities to be interested in state inspection option. One of the reasons we're here today is to really assess the interest in this, because if we don't have facilities that would want this, then there's limited reason to move forward with it. The at least equal to regulations may still be hard to meet for smaller scale facilities. So some of those custom exempt facilities, they might not have the capital to make changes to their facility to meet those state regulations, just like they wouldn't to USDA regulations. There's definitely ways that you can address that within the legislation itself, or to partner with other groups that want to help people meet the regulations and fund projects like that. But it's definitely a consideration to think about. It's also not an overnight solution. Legislation must pass state Congress and then be implemented. First, legislation has to be written, then it's argued about, you get co-sponsors for it. It becomes a discussion piece. There's, the back and forth there before it actually passes. And then, as we all know, it takes time to implement things that are passed. And then, as I've shared a couple times now, anything processed within a state inspection program would have to be sold within the boundaries of Idaho unless that additional agreement was signed with the federal government. So, okay, we've got a couple more questions. Yeah, we don't have adequate federal inspected facilities in our area to begin with. Absolutely. Custom facilities are stretched way too thin. Yes, they are. We could only help if there were adequate money to build new plants and train more workers. That's very true. And part of the things that we're looking at there are federal dollars to build new facilities. Most of them do require it to be federally inspected. There are ways to, within the legislation that we would put forward for a state program, to provide funding for new facilities to be built that are going to be state inspected. There's also ways to get private capital involved in this. There are a lot of different investment firms that are interested in addressing the livestock processing industry within the United States. Just in the last 2 years, we've seen multi-million-dollar projects pop up all throughout the country. So there's definitely interest when it comes to private investors working in this space. So there are potential ways to get money. So this is not going to solve all of those concerns addressed in that comment. We absolutely understand it. This is just one potential way that can be part of the solution across the entire livestock processing issue. Yeah, training more workers is definitely a huge barrier. FAIR has been in conversations about some workplace training and development potential opportunities. We absolutely think that is a critical piece of this. And again, the legislation that could direct ISDA to implement a state inspection program could also include provisions about workforce training funding for our community colleges and vocational training programs in Idaho. There are ways that the state government can incentivize those things. So that could be considered as part of the legislation to move something. It could be a package that includes state inspection, includes workforce training, includes grant dollars for facilities coming online. And that could be something that's all wrapped up into one bill that we push forward. Okay, Elliot says, Oregon has taken 2 years. Yeah, Utah was warned that they may lose their status after their review last year. So I'll address the second part first about the lose their status. So every year, FSIS, part of the USDA, does review existing programs to make sure that they're meeting that at least equal to regulatory clause. So Utah was kind of pushed back on and said, hey, you're not meeting those requirements. Here's what you need to do to meet them. And then they're held accountable to making updates to their whether it's their inspectors or their facilities themselves or their management style. Sometimes it can be related to how they're managing the paper trail of animals being processed. But the USDA FSIS does give guidelines on how those programs can meet the needs, and then the program is held accountable to meet those needs. So and yes, Oregon, it's taken 2 years there. It does take some time. It will not be an overnight thing. We don't know how long it would take Idaho to get the program up and running once the laws are put in place. I think that really is that question's a little outside of my realm of knowledge, because we'd really need to hear from ISDA on how long they think it would take to implement. But yes, it would not be overnight. Like, we couldn't write the legislation tomorrow, get it passed in January, and have a program up and running by next June. So this is kind of a long game. It does not solve problems immediately, but once we get it in place, it is there going into the future. So hopefully we could prevent some of the issues that our farmers and ranchers and processors have faced over the last few years. So I think that's everything in the chat so far, which all are incredible questions and really important considerations to make. Katie, if you want to go to the next slide for us, please. Thank you. So FAIR Idaho, as I mentioned, we are kind of in a fact gathering, assessing interest phase. We're doing a lot of background research, talking to other state program administrators. We're getting information from them. We're talking about costs. We're seeing what it would look like in Idaho. FAIR Idaho does have a lobbyist who's we've pulled into this conversation as well to talk about what would it look like to write legislation, who would be our allies, who would be supportive of this legislation, who could our sponsors be when we take this to the House of Reps or the state Senate. But we really need to hear from the people that would benefit the most from this type of program. So if you're an existing facility or you're interested in opening a new facility, would you seek state inspection? Producers who currently are raising livestock or interested in raising livestock, would you utilize a state inspection program? Commercial buyers, would you source product that's processed in a state inspected facility? These are all questions that we're asking, and we need to get feedback from our membership base and from our sector in general. So Katie has a link to a survey, which some of you have may already filled out. We would really appreciate it if you took just a couple minutes right now to fill out this survey. This helps us understand what your interest is. You could also share this survey with other people in your network that you think could benefit from a state inspection program. The more information, the more feedback we have, the better for us, because it really helps us drive the conversations. I know Katie has shared with me a few times over the last year or so that every time she goes to meet with one of our representatives, they say, how many members do you have? And that number has grown over the years. And I think we're a little over 300 now. But that shows the power in numbers. And the more people we get responding to the survey, expressing interest, even expressing hesitation, that really helps us make sure that the work we're doing is in alignment with our stakeholders. So the link is in the chat. I think Katie will also send a follow-up email to this, and we'll include that again. But if you have a moment to fill it out now, we would very much appreciate it. And now, once people have filled out the survey, you're welcome to come off mute and share your thoughts, opinions, or continue to add questions or comments into the chat. And I think I'm done talking for at least a few minutes while he will take the survey. So Thank you all for being here. I hope the information was helpful and maybe inspiring to think about what it could look like in Idaho to have a state inspection program.
So maybe we'll just sit quiet for a minute or two and let them fill that out. Perfect.
Great.
Maybe if you're done, just put something quick in the chat so we kind of gauge time correctly.
Katie, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good. Amy, thank you very much for the presentation. Braden with Farm Bureau. Just really wanted to tell you guys thank you for doing this. Thanks for the information. It was a great overview. I think you hit all of the important points, and I really just wanted to express my appreciation for FAIR, doing this work, and for the conversations that we've had over the past couple of years on this topic. You guys will remember that the Farm Bureau has policy that supports the state meat inspection program. We obviously have members particularly in different corners of the state that are maybe more isolated and a little bit far from a lot of processing options, and so they see this as a potential opportunity. But I appreciate the very transparent and manner that you disclosed all the information, the pros, the cons, and everything that we need to address. And really also thanks for doing this survey, because this is something that I think has been missing from the conversation thus far, particularly from the processor perspective. Obviously, I've got members, you have members that have inquired about this, that are interested in it, that keep on speaking about it. But what we need to really arm ourselves before we go before our elected officials and ask the state to make this type of an investment of resources and capital and everything that it takes, we need to make sure that there's that interest. And, obviously ours is a certain, our membership that we represent and that you represent, that's a part of the equation, but the other part of the equation is the processors themselves. And so I appreciate your guys' efforts to try to collect that information for us. It certainly will add to the conversation as we go forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Braden. We appreciate you being here. And so I know we've discussed, but maybe it would be nice to mention sort of what you've been hearing from your membership base and what they're concerned with, if you don't mind speaking to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, so the Farm Bureau does have and has had policy for a number of years that supports the state investing in creating a state inspection program. Really, it's been this policy idea was really generated by certain counties and members that live in more remote and isolated parts of the state, probably further away from the borders of the state and the population centers. But they see that as a real opportunity. We've been kind of in a very similar process over the past couple of years, trying to gather information, make sure that we really understand the facts. That as equal to clause that Amy has pointed out has certainly been, enlightening to some of our folks, recognizing that, a state meat inspection doesn't mean you get to, cut any corners. And certainly we never want our consumers to ever think that we would ever do so when it comes to providing them a food product. And then also, the fact that it does limit it to, sell within the state unless we get further along in the process where we could do, multi-state agreements. That's certainly been, I guess, informative and good information for our members to pursue. We've had conversations with other industry groups, whether the cattlemen, the Cattle Association, and the wool growers, and there's varying interest as well. Obviously, when we talk about a state like Idaho, we have typically more livestock than we do people in the state. And so, if we're talking about a program that limits the sale of the products to just, within the state, that obviously is a little bit of a limiting factor, because we can't always eat everything that we produce here. We're such a big ag producing state, but nonetheless, I think for certain areas and certain operations, this really is an opportunity. And so I'm intrigued to see the results of the survey as well. To again, as we go and have these conversations with policymakers, that we have all of the representation from all the factors that need to be presented to the policymakers of the state. So.
Oh, Katie's muted, but yeah.
Yeah, Brayden. I keep muting myself. I'm reminding others, but I keep muting myself. You got to represent, I guess. So, well, thanks.
You just mind if I jump in and just ask a quick question?
Of course, Dan, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm just getting started up here. We're going to be doing sheep and cattle eventually, but with smaller processors like myself, doing like a farm to table sort of situation, farmers markets. I haven't really researched it too deep about the approval process for USDA. I'm just hearing it's really daunting to try and get this done on your own property and process, for folks yourself, being able to sell in small cuts. This state program, is that really going to open up a lot of the benefits to the smaller homesteads for some of those things? I mean, when we're doing the same processing style and everything, what exactly would the state program alleviate for someone in our position versus USDA?
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't gotten to the point in legislation drafting where we looked at like the nitty-gritty details of what the regulations would require at a state level. It's definitely not perfect. The custom exempt facilities are probably the most lenient when it comes to those types of considerations for a very small on-farm processing operation. It also, I would say that, there's certain things that a federal inspector needs on site, like their own office and bathroom that locks. Those might be things that a state level program wouldn't actually require, because those are added cost to the processor themselves. It might be, something where individuals have a little bit more leniency on it. There's also the consideration that when the federal government writes regulations, they write it for like the biggest operator. And, I think when we're looking at state regulations, knowing that it will be smaller operators, legislation can be drafted that make it less burdensome on those. You'll still be, as we've said, at least equal to federal regulations, but there might be ways to think about how do we make sure that at least equal to is still accessible to smaller operators or easier to navigate for them to understand. So certain states have done things where they've provided HACCP plans. So if you don't know what a HACCP plan is, it's HAACP. It's an acronym for like hazardous control something or other. Don't know the acronym off the top of my head. Maybe Katie can Google it for us really quickly. But like those are very burdensome. A lot of people hire experts to write them for them. That can cost thousands of dollars. Elliot says hazardous analysis and critical control points. Thank you, Elliot. Appreciate that. So like getting somebody to write that for you can be a financial burden for some. So there are ways that a state inspection program can potentially have some templates of those available for people so they're easy to put into place. So it's definitely not going to be something that like anybody can spend a couple $1,000s on and build a state inspected facility that works perfectly for them with really minimal oversight. It is ideally a way that more processors can come online that are state inspected, so it can reduce some of the current crunch that our federal and our custom exempt processors are currently facing. So I think there's a couple of people kind of having responses in the chat. So Elliot said homesteads doing their own processing could currently operate under custom exempt and retail exempt. Yes, absolutely. As long as you're personally selling the retail product, you can run retail exempt and only need to have USDA inspection on harvest. That is very true. And I actually believe that you can even do on-site harvesting and processing if you're doing like a farm to table dinner, or you have like a bed and breakfast type setup where people that are coming to stay with you also consume the meat on site. So there's some loopholes there for smaller operators.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just,
yes, you are welcome.
I
And
know that we only have a few, like, 15 or so minutes left. I'd love to hear from some producers, if anyone's willing to speak up, to see what their thoughts are.
yeah, so Jessica said some farmers markets require USDA processing, even if you sell it yourself at market. Absolutely, because those are like retail packages that you're selling. Ideally, a state inspection program would be something that a farmers market would consider. And that could be something that we assess in our outreach to people is like, would farmers markets change their bylaws or their requirements so that people selling meat there could also be state inspected? I understand that they will not do custom exempt, which for legal purposes, they kind of shouldn't, but state inspection is kind of a different area when it comes to that.
I'm happy to speak to, as a producer, it's Nicholas Purdy with Tigu Livestock, on the potential benefits of this program. If I had a state program, and then I could go to a local shop and have them butcher my animal, and then I can sell direct. And I wouldn't necessarily even have to go to farmers markets, but just sell direct to a client list I already have. That would be exceptional. I mean, that's really what I'm looking for out of this state program, is to just sell to a local group of customers that I already have through other avenues or other businesses that we're involved with, and use that as another revenue chain. Currently, I'm selling all my cows all natural, but I'm selling them through Superior. I'm selling them, I'm selling them to a feedlot to be finished. Where I have a feedlot, I can finish my own cows. I just don't have a way to get it to the end customer. Due to I just don't have. I'm not slotted with any of the local processors or any of the processing plants in Idaho. I'm just not geared for that. But this would open up that avenue for me.
Thank you, Nicholas. Josh,
Yeah.
I saw you unmuted for a minute. Do you have anything to add? Josh Hale?
I don't have very good service, so I've been missing some things here. I think one of the biggest benefits is for everybody that wants to go down the route is that the access to local regulators versus doing everything through the Denver office is a huge deal. Because unless you can knock on somebody's door, you don't ever get their attention if you're a little guy. To try and get a plan going.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important consideration. So what Josh is mentioning is that the USDA office that oversees our inspectors is located in Denver. So it would be easier to build a relationship with local regulators like ISDA and their inspectors than that USDA Denver office. I think is a very valid consideration for smaller facilities that might not have the time to go down to Denver and knock on someone's doors or chase them around, but they might already have a relationship with ISDA, or it's easier to form for them.
Nicholas, I saw you unmuted again. Do you have anything to add?
No, I just echo what Josh was saying.
Okay,
Exactly.
perfect.
Awesome. Any other feedback? There's some great, conversation in the chat where people are sharing their kind of knowledge and experiences. So you're welcome to continue to do that. But we really appreciate people sharing how this could benefit them or the concerns that they have, or, if you think it's a great idea, you can thumbs up it. We as Fair Idaho really want to advocate in ways that benefit, like I said, our membership basis, which is independent, small and mid-scale farm operators in Idaho that are selling to businesses and consumers within Idaho. So we feel like a state inspection program definitely checks those boxes. But we also know that it is not like a one-size-fits-all solution for every single thing that livestock processors and people that utilize livestock processors face. So it's, as people mentioned earlier in the chat, there's definitely workforce development considerations and getting capital to build out or expand facilities. Those are definitely things that we are thinking about. And I think there are some opportunities to include those in the drafted legislation that we would put forward. So it's a more all-encompassing legislation and just not just a meat inspection program standalone. I did notice in the chat, I might be like putting you on the spot. I think your name is pronounced Jasa, but you said you were from CSI Ag Department. Don't know if you have any thoughts or things to share about some of the workforce development stuff that CSI is doing, but we'd welcome it if you did or wanted to share or say anything. Love putting people on the spot like that I don't know.
Pretty sure she already signed off. I'm not seeing her name in the screens.
Oh, I still see your name, but also don't want to,
Oh,
call her out too much.
I-
No worries, no worries.
I can't speak for JASA, but I work in the ag department here at CSI along with JASA. And as an educator with a desire to help students understand what's going on in the ag community. And what you're mentioning in particular is this idea of being involved in policy. What does that look like from a student's perspective that might have a fairly narrow focus on, I want to do this for this reason? And you could fill in any of the blanks there with a number of different things, but beginning to get a grasp of the bigger picture of what's out there. You brought up this idea that in the pro side, there's what I'll call an entrepreneurial component to that. And we're seeing many students who are very interested in ag from the standpoint of, I don't have any roots with a farm or ranch, but I'm observing what farming and ranching is, and I'm liking what I'm seeing, and I'm wanting to understand how to get involved with that. And to give them credit where credit is due, they're seeing this entrepreneurial component as, hey, that could just be my ticket for getting into farming and ranching, because I don't have connections to the land base to do it on a large scale. What does that look like on a small scale? And both Jason and I have wrestled with, how do we help our students get more involved with policy? What is it? What's going on in the industry about it? And how might we bring them up to speed to feel confident that they could be contributors, not only in understanding it, but actually being a part of formulating it from a perspective of, I'm new to this, but I'm really intrigued with what's out there. What's the next step for me to take?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. Thank you so much for that. And our organization is trying to work with high school students actually to help solve some of the issues that we're facing within the organization and our local food system, but it would be great to engage college students in that discussion as well. So there's another, Janice had said, in our area, there's already too few facilities. Many have closed in recent years as the operators aged out and not enough workers. I'm wondering how to get community colleges to start training programs. These would be expensive to run and would need special facilities. In our area, the only training program is at a 4-year college, but I think that might make it difficult to get people who want training but are not interested in the expense of a 4-year degree. So I agree with you on that. We, University of Idaho does have a 4-year program. We actually need a accelerated technical program. And that's sort of where we're at. I mean, it's definitely a workforce development issue that we have been trying to address within our organization, because with every issue that you have, for example, livestock processing, it's definitely a multi-pronged approach to find a solution. It's not just legislation. It's actually having discussion with you all, talking about how can we get some of these community colleges to maybe adopt a 2-year or an 18-month program, because the 4-year tends to lend to people going into upper management and then wanting to pay off their student loan debt. So that's something that we're facing in the state, and trying to find a solution to that. But again, it takes time.
Yeah, so Jasa did add to the chat that it's something that CSI is definitely interested in. There's a process that they go through to get funding through the Idaho Division of Career Technical Education. We see the need, just need partners willing to help us with facilities and funding. So I think we know workforce is a big barrier to getting more processors online, have processors that are here running at full capacity. I do think there are some federal dollars available for this type of thing. I think we could also see, how the state could invest in it. And I would say that Fair Idaho is very interested in talking with you, Jasa, about the opportunities there are to advocate for, state level funding for it, to raise awareness about what you all want to work on. And then Bill, I wanted to quickly address two things that you brought up, the entrepreneurial component. So I help manage a fund that would put capital in the hands of entrepreneurs, and we're specifically ag sector related. So I would be happy to chat with any students that are interested. And, if we don't have any more questions, maybe I could put Christina on, give her a second to just talk about getting students involved in policy. I think Christina has probably the most experience working in policy and like what that takes to engage. So I'm getting a little off, Katie, from livestock processing, but I think it's important to, these are all related to the work that we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Christina, if you have just a minute and then we'll wrap up. I know we've got about 4 minutes left, so that'd be perfect.
Well, I'll just take a minute because I know you want to plug one more survey, Katie. But I'm Christina Stucker-Gossi. I wear a couple of hats, but one of my jobs is to do particularly policy advocacy around sustainable farming systems, and sustainability is a big buzzword. There's lots of political discussion around what that means. These days, it's a lot around climate smart agriculture, climate smart commodities. We're moving into a farm bill year. Strangely, Idaho doesn't have representation on congressional ag committees. We have in the past, but not currently. Same with appropriations. But we do have some good regional contacts, and it's always fun to have that discussion around what could priorities look like, what's going well, what would we like to see changed, and then making the strategies and relationships to make those happen. So I'm always happy to connect. If you want to connect, you can message me in the chat and we can exchange information, or I'll maybe drop my email. But yeah, policy.
Thanks so much, Christina. So, since we're getting close to the end, I'll probably just go over this slide. So whenever we advocate, as Amy had mentioned, our representatives always ask, how many members do you have? And Fair Idaho now has 300 members across the state of Idaho. For farmers to join Fair, it's $75 annually. When we go and advocate, that collective voice really has an impact, and that's how we're able to actually make positive change for the industry. And then we do have a lobbyist, Roger Batt. That when I mention our lobbyist, it doesn't mean that this is necessarily the route that we're going. We want to hear from our members. And as Amy had mentioned, we actually work for the interests of our members, and that's why we were formed. I did want to mention, we did a local foods promotion, or we received the USDA local foods promotion grant to learn art of butchery series throughout Idaho. So we've recently got done with a lot of travel to state and did some really cool classes at the University of Idaho, in Sun Valley at the Culinary Institute. Really, when we're talking about some of the issues that our ranchers are facing, we want to look at it from a legislative standpoint, but we also want to educate people. And so our goal with this grant was not only to highlight smaller producers, but to be able to have these discussions about workforce development in butchery. It's about really teaching people how to break down animals. How do we make learning the art of butchery cool, and so that more people want to go into this trade? So those resources are up on our website. I'll try to get the link here in just a second, but we have a report due on this grant. And so Christina is going to put a 3-question survey that would help us in this reporting into the chat. And then I want to thank you all so much for attending today. And Amy, I'll let you close out, but I really want to thank Amy Mateus. She is our Farm and Ag Chair, and she is one awesome human being that has worked in this space for many years. So we're very fortunate to have her. So thank you.
Thanks, Katie. And thank you all for being here. I think there's some excellent conversations happening in the chat. Definitely seems like the technical workforce development piece is a big topic of conversation right now. So I think FAIR will look at other ways that we can address that vocational training and be supportive on that front as well. And, you know, please join if you want to join our Farm and Ag Committee. We are accepting members. We meet monthly. Right now, it's kind of a 50-50 split between producers, farmers, ranchers, and then advocates in the space. So like Josh, he's one of our Farm and Ag Committee members. He's on the call today. So if you're interested in that, you're definitely welcome to reach out to me or Katie. We'd love to have you join us on that. And then I really appreciate all the dialogue happening here and all the insights shared by members. And thank you for taking time to fill out the survey. That's really going to help us assess the interest. And if you are a producer and you work with custom exempt facilities, you're welcome. We would really appreciate you sharing this information with them, share the survey so we can assess interest from a processing standpoint too. As Braden said, that is one of the missing pieces that we really need to understand. Who would be interested in a state inspection program if it was to come online that are already existing facilities, and then entrepreneurs who want to open a facility. So I think that's it from me. Really, again, appreciate you all being here and excited about the conversations that have started because of this call today and the way the direction that FAIR Idaho is heading going forward.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. I'll follow up with an email. Take care.